Good morning, everybody, and welcome to TLC Live. As every Wednesday, I'm Andrea Gomez.
And I'm candidate Orlando Sanchez running for city controller
We
of
are in the
Houston. We're
runoff.
in the middle of a heated campaign to drastically change the trajectory of the city of Houston, eliminate corruption, and bring in transparency and new leadership. This could be a new era for Houston, Texas. And the reason I say that is that very few people will decide who the next mayor, controller, and the next city council members of the city of Houston will be. Probably about 110,000 people will determine the next leadership of the city. So your vote is absolutely critical. And not only your vote, but when you vote, please take a neighbor or your entire family. You can vote at any of the early voting locations, which are listed at harrisvotes.com. harrisvotes.com. Look up voting locations, 7 in the morning to 7 p.m., and it's running through December 5th. On December 5th, early voting terminates. And then the polls will open for one more day on Saturday, December 9th. That'll be your last opportunity to change the direction of the city of Houston. There are some exciting things happening, and I understand that Kingwood, Texas is on fire. The turnout is absolutely phenomenal. And Kingwood alone could determine the direction of Houston, Texas, along with our friends out in Clear Lake and, of course, the west side of Houston. We have a very interesting race in District G in Houston.
Mhm.
Please get out and vote. You have any questions, go to my campaign website, which is orlandosanchez.com. You can send us an email if you have any questions. There's a phone number there. Please get out and vote. It's absolutely critical. I have been outspent by over 10 times. My opponent spent almost $2 million for a position. By the way, my opponent was running for mayor of Houston, but then he got scared away by Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee. So he went shopping for a position, Andrea, and ended up in the controller's race. And So anyway, I'm excited. I'm grateful. I'm thankful to Houston. I'm thankful to the Hispanics that are turning out in larger numbers than usual. Kingwood is performing beyond any expectation. And hopefully next week we will have one of my opponents who ran in the first, as you know, there were what, four candidates for city controller.
Mm-hmm.
Only two of us made it into the runoff,
Yeah.
but one of them that was running was a current city council member, Dave Martin, and Dave is working hard out in Kingwood and helping turn people out. And hopefully, we'll have Dave Martin on next week to give us a report about what's going on.
So as we speak, we are in early voting, as you said. I started Monday, and I went at 8 in the morning to vote. Of course, I vote for you.
Thank you.
But
And I know your son is coming in from Texas A&M Saturday to vote for me.
we need to that. We need
I
to.
will personally go pick him up.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
Tell Hadi
I
to be
will. I
ready.
will tell Harry. That's very important. And my dad is also voting. I already talked. I just talked to him, so he said yes. He's planning to go and vote today. I like to always vote
I,
early
I, I
voting.
did it. I did it yesterday.
You did it yesterday. Many people wait till elections day because tradition and things like that,
But
which
the
is
weather can get
fine.
bad.
You don't know
You
what can
never know.
happen.
The county may run out of paper again at certain ballot boxes.
Hmm.
So, yeah, it's very important that everybody goes out and votes.
Yeah. So, in another note, something that is we've been watching since October 7, very very difficult, sad, and shocking situation. October 7, the terrorist group Hamas from Palestine attack.
And Hezbollah up north in
That happened
Lebanon.
after, but
Yeah.
first it was Hamas.
And now the Iranians.
Yeah, attack Israel, and since then the conflict is escalating to, many people got killed, other people got kidnapped, and they still releasing some of the victims, and so that's why we need to address the situation, because the conflict is in the Middle East, but it's impact the whole world, and it's impacting the United States. It's impacting the universities, college, communities, cities. We're seeing protesting people seems to not really have the information accurate. The media, even they've been failing as always, giving the accurate information. So
And not only that, Andrea, let me say, as you correctly point out, that it's not only in the Middle East, it's affecting everybody in the world, but especially when we think about Houston and Harris County, we're one of the most diverse cities in the nation.
yeah,
And we have a huge Jewish community with ties to Israel, but we also have a huge Arab community. We have Christian Arabs, we have Muslim Arabs, and so this is an issue that's critical to our community, to the state of Texas, and we really want to discuss it and lay out what's going on. How have we gotten to this point? Is there a possibility of a resolution for this conflict in the long term? What happens in the short term? But I'm proud to say that Houston has maintained a peaceful, often a lot of protests, but in a very peaceful manner. So the Palestinians and the Israelis and the Jews will come out, joined by other groups, but so far it's been peaceful.
and
Unlike other cities where we've had
and
random shootings, which is unacceptable.
exactly, and countries like in Europe, like France, they said, the president said, no protesting. Period.
Yeah, but we can't do that here because everybody has a constitutional right of free speech.
Exactly. So we invited Professor Eric Botts, as Assistant Professor, Director of Global Cybersecurity Program Centers for International Studies of the University of St. Thomas. Professor, thank you so much for your time. I know you have only 20 minutes to give us the insight of this historical um, um, conflict that is happening in the Middle East, but is impacting global, the whole world is watching very close this conflict, because as we're seeing every single day, protesting and people like they're dividing hates, and this is like getting worried, and the Jewish community It's like they don't feel safe in the United States and nowhere in the world. So, welcome to TLC and thanks for your time.
Well, thank you for having me. And if you would, I would like to invite your listeners and your viewers to think about the conflict a little differently. So you're getting a lot of the what I call kinetic warfare images from the media, the bombings, the rocket attacks, and you mentioned that, and both you and Orlando mentioned the protests around the country and around the world, the deep divisions. But I wanted to, if you would allow me, take a moment to tell you what's accelerating a lot of those deep divisions. While there's kinetic warfare going on the ground in Gaza, there is also a shadow war in cyberspace that is taking place that most people don't understand. And the shadow war has a tendency to exacerbate or heighten those tensions. There are groups that are very specific in how they target other groups through the use of social media. So we saw this also with Ukraine. It continues. But I want to point directly at what's happening in Israel and Gaza. So, almost immediately after the first attack against Israel and the subsequent response by Israelis, there was an explosion of hacktivist disinformation campaigns, some by nation state actors, some by hacktivist groups, um, early what we call open source intelligence looking at this indicates that there's about 100 or so active groups participating in this sort of cyber warfare between Israel and Hamas, targeting one side or the other. About the majority of them, about 75% or so, are, by looking at their posts and their the tax strategies that they use, seem to be supporting the Palestinian side. Another 20 or 25% are supporting what might be considered the Israeli side, and there are very few that take a more neutral posture. Now, some of these are driven by nation state actors. We had a very curious case I looked at where there was it was posted on it was a Russian botnet, and it was posted on several sites, TikTok, Lapon, Facebook, and X, formerly Twitter. But the image showed it seemed to be an IDF soldier, an Israeli soldier, and speaking in Ukrainian language, talking about how terrible Ukraine army was and that he had joined the IDF because the pay and benefits were better, and he was fighting for for Israel against the Palestinians. Well, it turned out that it was a computer generated voiceover using artificial intelligence. The real picture was an Israeli soldier speaking to Israeli families about where they can get information to deal with medical issues having to do with PTSD or their families. But it was taken, that image was taken, and a voiceover in Ukrainian that was computer generated was being used, and it was set up through a Russian bot. So, just to give you an idea, so we have different cyber hacktivist groups, one called KillNet, and the other called Anonymous Sudan, which were active in the Ukrainian war. Now they've shifted some of their focus to the war in Gaza. Disinformation, misinformation, but we've seen an escalation of these attacks beyond just there's a cyber warfare technique called distributed denial of service attacks. It's usually when you take a botnet or you take a bunch of computers and you attack a website to try to overwhelm it. So a lot of those were started almost immediately after the conflict began. But now we're seeing other hacktivist groups. You love these names: Silent Gang, Ganesha Team, panic team launching beyond DDoS attacks. Now they're starting to launch destructive malware attacks, mainly at Israel, but also at France, India, Ukraine, United States, countries that are perceived to be uh, aligned with Israel's policies. They're attacking civil society, the private sector, uh, and even though most of these attacks are being fended off by good cyber defenses, there's an escalation and also an escalation in the sophistication of these attacks. And this is what's quite worrying is that there's a pro-Palestinian group called Anon Ghost that was able to penetrate Israel's cyber defenses. And they gained access to an app used by Israelis to warn them of impending rocket attacks. So they posted fake alerts, even a fake nuclear launch warning. So these things are disruptive. They're designed to be disruptive and sow confusion. And we're seeing again an increase in the level of sophistication and the virulence of these malwares.
Professor, propaganda is nothing new in warfare. I mean, I suppose back in the Second World War and even in Vietnam, they had radio stations that were broadcasting both from the United States side, the Western uh, entities to North Vietnam. And of course, the Vietnamese were famous for broadcasting to Americans.
Mm-hmm.
And in fact, a famous person here, Jane Fonda, got caught in the middle of it when she was interviewed by the North Vietnamese, and that was broadcast. And of course, she's always earned the moniker of Hanoi Jane. But leaflets are dropped.
Right.
So this is really nothing new, propaganda. The question I have for you is the average person like myself that's on the internet and may do a Google search for uh, Hamas and the Israeli war. I'm going to get all these different sites. Some of them are theoretically respected, like the Associated Press, Reuters, the New York Times, and others that still have some semblance of journalism, although they're hanging on. Um, but there are others that, as you say, are
Yeah.
organizations that are just feeding people misinformation. So the question is, how do I determine the difference?
Absolutely. Great question, Orlando. So, usually what I advise, and we have wonderful conversations with students about this. There are some pretty good open source intelligence sites, but I say aggregate your news sources. You mentioned AP. There are more classic news media sites that, within their corporate culture, they do a measure of fact checking. Now, having said that, I have to advise that they're being inundated with disinformation, misinformation, and propaganda from a lot of these other sites. So they have to do a lot of their own due diligence. And one of the difficulties, all of the, like I said, more of the mainstream media have, is that the rush to be first with their reporting. Sometimes I think the due diligence isn't done with the level of care necessary to filter out a lot of the misinformation, disinformation, and propaganda. So, misinformation is often information that's propagated through the media that may not be vetted properly, not fact checked properly. The individuals who spread such information may not know that it's error prone or that it is incorrect, right? So it's misinformation. Disinformation is deliberately sending information, posting it on social media, or sending it to mainstream media sites that is designed to mislead or to confuse messaging. So it's the sender knows it's incorrect and false information. In propaganda, it's usually a campaign by a nation state that's designed to promote a certain narrative that's in alignment with their goals and objectives. So I thought I would lay that out so that people understand that you can get misinformation, but there was no intention to mislead. It's just that the person who sent it did not do their due diligence or didn't know it was incorrect information. Whereas disinformation and propaganda, there is an intention to mislead in both cases.
Professor, I am a member of the Council on Foreign Relations, and one of the things that I have found is that certain think tanks that have been around for a while and have experts, silos of experts in different areas. For example, the Council on Foreign Relations has experts on the Middle East, Latin America, domestic policy of the United States, energy policy, environmental policy, energy experts. And I've always found those to be great resources, whether it's attached to a university or not, the Hoover Institute, the Council on Foreign Relations, many others, the Carter Center, all put out expert
Mm-hmm.
opinions that I think are not propaganda. I mean, they may have a particular slant. Some will say that's a very liberal position, but I've always found that it's good to read those sources. Do you direct your students or folks to think tanks or institutions that have been around that have a pretty good grasp of global geopolitics?
Absolutely, Orlando. I think that was excellent advice putting that out. Those are reputable sources. They're peer reviewed. The individuals are serious academics, and so what happens is people like you and those who are really have a deep interest in foreign affairs will read those sites and look at that information. But what tends to happen to the average person is that they want the up to date, up to the minute information, and they'll seek that out either through social media. And that's where you run into the problems because that information often isn't well vetted. So what I advise people is that yes, you can look at that information, but take it with a grain of salt, and then fall back on some of the sources that you mentioned to get a broader, deeper picture of what's going on. So you're better informed, and that also kind of helps you to to evaluate those other sources. So you may be, and I don't want to, point out any particular source. Say you have a source that you've been going to, and then you go to like you mentioned, Council of Foreign Relations, or go to SAIS or Georgetown University or one of these other sites, um, and you read an article and you say, well, wait a minute, this article kind of contradicts what I'm seeing over here. And I've noticed that I'm not really satisfied with this source of information. So maybe I need to look at other sources to get a broader perspective on what's going on. Ask questions. And I think you hit the nail right on the head. There are a lot of reputable sites out there that will take this information, digest it a little bit, and again, it gives you a broader perspective. So you're not just taking information that's just coming directly from some of these sites that may not be reputable.
Professor, something that we want to understand is what is going on in college and universities. It seems like the young people and is getting things from social media sources. They're not really. I mean, and we're talking about universities like Harvard, like people that we're expecting different reactions.
Yeah. So unfortunately, here at the University of St. Thomas, we were very early in meeting with our students. We had myself and another professor. We had a briefing with the students. We laid out the historical background, going all the way back to the Ottoman Empire, and the Balfour Agreements, and talked about that, and then subsequent founding of the State of Israel after the end of the British Mandate. So we built a historical perspective, and then we talked to the students about the different aspects of the conflict from the various perspectives, from the Palestinian perspective, from the Israeli perspective, from the geopolitical perspective. And then I did something where uh, I talked about two fictional characters, one a Palestinian, one an Israeli, and I talked about their families and their lives and the things that their aspirations. And I said, and now they're caught up in this war that neither one of them wanted because there are forces that are at play that are beyond the individual sometimes. Sometimes people get caught up, and you could do this talking about Ukrainians and Russians. We tend to focus on the leadership and on the significant actors, but there are millions of people on both sides that get caught up in this. So we ask the students to think of those individuals from a human perspective, and not just make them into caricatures. They're real human beings. There's fathers and mothers, children on both sides who didn't want this war, who are just trying to live their lives, and now they're caught up. So the idea is to give the students a framework for being sympathetic to the human cost of this, and to not get caught up in sort of the noise and the anger, and to set that aside. And I think we're going to have another briefing today and a conversation with our students. But I think if some of us in positions of responsibility in the academy and at universities and high schools or in our communities, if we could talk about it from a human perspective, understand that people get upset and angry, but let's just have a civil discourse about this. And I think that is the direction to go in, and I hope some of the other universities, I can only speak to what we're doing here at St. Thomas, but I think that's the way you have to get in front of this, and then you have to have an open and honest conversation about what this means to people.
Absolutely. And I know you have to go to another engagement that you have. Just to finalize, what we can do, not only here in Houston as regular people that trying to understand everything and seeing every day the news and also the protests and everything, what we can do as a family and pass this empathy to our relatives, our kids, our parents, what we can do as a society.
I go back to having, and I think Orlando mentioned it as well. You have to have the dialogue and be willing to engage in civil discourse, but you also have to acknowledge people's feelings of frustration and the hurt and pain they have. You have to acknowledge that. That's part of what's going on. But then you have to also recognize the humanity of every person you're dealing with and say, let's find a way through this, working together. It may take a long time. I was a former foreign service officer, and I spent 3 years in Dublin, Ireland, and they had a conflict in Northern Ireland
Oh no, they call it the
that looked like it
troubles.
would
The
never end.
troubles,
Yeah,
professor.
right. The troubles. Yeah, I was there during part of that, and I could talk a lot of the conversations I had with people on both sides, the Protestant paramilitaries and the IRA and things of that nature. But we as a human community, as a family, were able to bring peace to that through negotiation. So it's possible, but it takes time and a lot of hard work. And it's really easy to become discouraged and kind of walk away from it. And so I would say avoid being discouraged, acknowledge the pain that people are feeling on all sides, but be steadfast in opening up the civil discourse and the dialogue with people that you don't agree with.
Well, thank you, Professor, and I wholeheartedly agree. If you need to jump off, I know that you've got something to do, so thank you for your time. But the professor is absolutely correct. I've spent a lot of the last few weeks visiting with my Palestinian friends because when I went to the University of Houston, I had dear friends that are Palestinian, and I have dear friends that are Jewish in this
Yeah.
community. And the idea of compassion and empathy in anything in life is important. I spent quite a bit of time in Israel, and I crossed into Bethlehem and met with the Palestinians and went to several roundtables that included Jews and Palestinians, and it's sad. I tell you that I don't know if there's any polls, but if they ever did a poll in Gaza, that most people in Gaza would not have wished this war
Absolutely.
upon each other, either
Absolutely.
upon Israel or upon the
Yeah.
Palestinians in Gaza Strip. Most of those folks are peace loving people that want to try to get along, and there's great relationships in certain areas in terms of economy, in terms of maintenance, in terms of social services and humanitarian aid on both sides. There are Jews that help Palestinians, and there are Palestinians that have Jewish
Vice versa.
friends, and vice versa. What happens, Andrea, and I tell people this, it's like Mexico.
Mm.
Most Mexicans, virtually 99.9% of the Mexicans, are good, hardworking, honest people, family oriented. Unfortunately, there are regions of Mexico that are, and you as a Colombian know this,
Yeah.
that are controlled by drug cartels, whether
Absolutely.
it's in Sinaloa, whether it's the Gulf Cartel,
Mm.
and these operate as paramilitary groups. You went through this in Colombia.
Yeah.
Uh, and they can start conflicts among each other,
Yeah.
and innocent people get caught in the middle.
Mm-hmm.
Same thing in Gaza. Hamas is, not even an official government. It's not like they're elected. It is a paramilitary group that is fed to foment the conflict in the Middle East by external forces that are opposed to Israel, primarily Iran.
Yeah.
Qatar is helping in the situation, but I think Qatar does more to help the Palestinian people. In other words, they provide humanitarian aid, they provide funding for hospitals and doctors and clinics for children and schools, because Hamas doesn't care about them. Hamas has one focus, and that is the overthrow of the Israeli government, the eradication of Israel. And as they state, any friend of Israel is their enemy. So we're their enemy. And
Yeah.
this is, and if you go to the region, Andrea, the first word that is uttered out of either Palestinians or Jewish mouths is, it's complicated.
Mm-hmm.
It is extremely complicated. I know you know this because I think your family has some connections to the region.
Yeah.
I think your father
The
is of
fa-
Lebanese
the
descent.
father and the father of my kids is from Lebanon.
Yeah, so it is not easy, folks, but I can tell you, um, that the region sits on the Mediterranean. It's absolutely spectacular.
Yeah.
It's absolutely beautiful. Before Beirut was bombed, it was like the Riviera of the Mediterranean.
Absolutely. They call the Paris of the Middle East.
Ger-
And I've been in that country 12 times in my life when
telling
I was married to the father of my kids. Beautiful, beautiful. And I've been
uh,
in the border of Israel. Beautiful, beautiful people. The majority of the people has nothing to do with
has
this.
nothing to do with Hezbollah,
No,
has nothing to do with Hamas, has
exactly.
nothing to do with terrorism. And it's like, I went to Tel Aviv. I've spent time there, and again, a beautiful city on the Mediterranean, world class restaurants. And it's always amazing to me that when people work hard, and the ingenuity of the Jewish people to take basically what is, and if you've never been to Israel, and if you've been to the Texas Hill Country, that's kind of what Israel looks like. I remember going to Bethlehem at the Church of the Nativity, where Christ and Mary and Joseph, Mary gave birth to Christ there. There's a church on the spot where Jesus was born. And it's up on a hill. And I looked across to the north, and I think to myself, you know, gosh, this hasn't changed in 2,223 years. But um, it's like the hill country. And so the Israelis, the Jewish state, has basically taken semi-arid desert and converted into a very fertile, crop-producing area,
Yeah.
very self-sustaining, and they're willing to share that technology with the Palestinians. I know that the Israelis were helping the Palestinians in terms of agriculture and how to improve output on it. So it's sad to see this because, as has been reported, 14,000 Palestinians have been killed. It breaks my heart to see the children and the families crying.
Yeah.
We have nothing to do with this.
Yeah.
We didn't
Abs-
want this.
Here it is, nobody's winning, everybody's a victim.
Yeah. And, I mean, whether people agree with me or not, when Israel is attacked, they're going to fight back because Israel is in a very hostile
Yeah,
neighborhood. They're surrounded by, on the north by Hezbollah, Jordan, Iran not too far away.
yeah,
Fortunately, Egypt made peace with Israel some time ago, but the whole region is a hotbed, and that's why we have to follow it. We have to understand what's going on, and as the professor said, we have to be compassionate about what's going on.
compassion and educate ourselves about history, and that's the most important
Yeah,
thing.
and next week we hope to have um, a member of the Palestinian community with us and a member of the Jewish community. And it's not going to be a debate, it's going to be sort of a discussion about
To
how we got
understand.
here, what are potential resolutions, and we're going to approach it with a bit of compassion and try to understand what's going on. But it's tragic to see what's going on all sides.
Absolutely. Meanwhile, we need to concentrate now in politics in
Locally.
Houston. local local politics very important.
Yeah.
And well, Orlando, we're just like hoping that everybody go out and vote, and everybody has conscious that the importance of participating, because everything that happen in politics impact our daily life.
Yeah, it's all politics. People like, let me tell you, I've spent the last several years building up this organization, which you all know is called Texas Latino Conservatives. And our main focus is to increase participation by Hispanics, by Latinos in the political process. That's number one. Number two is to talk to them about the difference between liberal governments and conservative governments with limited powers. And so we try to educate both the Hispanic community about the Constitution, about free markets, about capitalism. Is it perfect? No. Is it the best system that we've devised in the world? Yes. And also a mission to educate uh, the Republican Party about who we are as Hispanics, because a lot of people think that Hispanics are all Mexicans that cross the border. No, we're not. Hispanics are as diverse as Americans. People always ask me, "What's a Hispanic?" And my rhetorical response is, "What's an American?"
Hmm.
An American can be a person of Asian descent from the West Coast. It could be a Irish person from Boston. It can be a Cajun from Louisiana with French background. It could be a Cuban like myself who emigrated here. We're all Americans. We're of every race. We're of every nationality. Same way with Hispanics. You have Caucasian Hispanics in Argentina that were descendants of Europe, but you have the indigenous people of the Americas, all the way from the Incas of Peru, all the way to the Aztecs of Mexico, and all the tribes in between. So the Hispanic world is as complex as the Western world, and so that's our mission, is to educate people. And so I've traveled the entire state of Texas on that mission. But beyond that, I've been campaigning for a position known as city controller in Houston, which is the chief financial officer for the fourth largest city in the United States, because I'm afraid about the financial situation facing the city of Houston in very short term. People don't think that municipalities and city governments can go broke. But it wasn't many years ago, I believe in the 80s, under Mayor Dinkins in New York. New York went broke.
Yeah.
It was a disaster. Detroit has gone broke. Orange County as a county went broke by virtue of bad investments. So cities and counties can go broke, and the consequences is that people that are on pensions, people that rely on government to pick up the garbage and provide clean water, all those services go by the wayside. We have to rebuild the infrastructure of a city when we go broke. Houston is in a bad financial situation. So I decided to run for the position of city controller based on my experience both in the private sector and the government side handling billions of dollars. And as I travel the city of Houston and I visit with tens of thousands of voters and residents and taxpayers, I hear this complaint all the time. Crime's out of control. My water bill is outrageous. The city doesn't respond. Police take too long We don't have enough police protection. The streets are being taken over by dragsters. And so, okay, I understand the complaints, but let me tell you something now. This week, you as a citizen and as a voter, you're in charge. You're in charge. And what's tragic about it is that over 2 million people live in Houston, and less than 100,000 people will decide the course of the direction of the city come December 9th. That's sad. That's tragic. And it reminds me of a story when I used to serve on the city council with an African American friend of mine. We had nothing in common politically, but we've become best friends.
Yeah.
And his name is Michael Yarbrough from District B, the historic Fifth Ward of Houston. Historic African American, I might add. Michael says there's a story about a man traveling, and he sees an old man on a porch, Andrea, on a rocking chair, and he goes up to the man and says hello and introduces himself and wants to talk. And he notices there's a dog at the end of the porch. And the man looks at that dog. He says, "Why is that dog moaning and groaning?" And the old man on the rocking chair says, "Well, he's sitting on a nail." And so the guy says, "Well, why doesn't he get up?" And the old man on the rocking chair says, "I guess it doesn't hurt bad enough." Folks, if you're tired of sitting on that nail, quit complaining. You have until December 5th. It literally took me 2.5 minutes to vote and pick the next leadership of the city of Houston. How long did it take you to vote?
It's like 30 seconds.
30 seconds.
Yeah, it was
If
quick.
you don't have 30 seconds or 2.5 minutes to drive to a voting location and take 30 seconds to pick 5 candidates for office that'll help the direction of the city, you're like that dog sitting on the nail. You don't have enough energy to get up off the nail and go vote and change the direction of the city. But yet, I bet you after the election on December 9th, you will complain like a hound dog about how Houston is falling apart.
We
So,
cannot complain if we don't vote.
don't,
Period.
when you see me on the streets and you didn't change the leadership of Houston, don't complain to me. Now, if you elect me, I will take all the complaints that you want to send my way.
We're gonna put your phone number there.
Yeah, right. I always give out my cell number.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
I know. Well, let's hope that everybody go and vote. Remember, we're still in early voting till December 5th, and the election is Saturday, December 9th. So let's go and vote. Let's go participate, because then we cannot complain.
Yeah, and if you don't feel compelled to go vote, think about your children. I really want you to sit at the dinner table tonight and look at your children.
Yeah.
The random crime, the random shooting, the random robberies, the random smash and
Yeah.
grabs now that we have Christmas coming up. Look at your children or your grandchildren for this holiday season and ask yourself, is it worth it to take 5 minutes of my time between now and December 5th and try to make a difference in Houston? I think if you look into the eyes of your children, grandchildren, maybe your grandparents, family members, I think the decision will be yes. So please go out and do it. Go vote.
Okay, well, thank you so much for being with us, and please visit us at TexasLatinoConservatives.com, TexasLatinoConservatives.com. We have Leadership Latino coming up at the end of January, so please get.
And take a moment to tell them what Leadership Latino is, Andrea.
So Leadership Latino is a program under Texas Latino Conservatives that it's educating and guiding and helping others not only to become the leader of your community, but to run for office. We teach them. We teach them with the best people, the experienced people that is being in the political field, and telling you how to run for office from the moment that you decide what position, to fundraisers and blog walking and push cars and website, media training, everything that has to do with the campaign. We do it through Leadership Latino. It's a very important program under Texas Latino Conservatives, and we are so proud to say that many of our students are being elected.
Well, not only that, all of the ladies that came to Leadership Latino last year that ran for the Katy Independent School District were elected. And let me remind you that there are 3 candidates on the ballot in the city of Houston that are Leadership Latino graduates.
Yeah.
So
Julian
if you
Ramirez.
don't think we make a difference,
Roy
We do.
Morales
Yeah, Roy Morales, myself, and Julian
Ramirez.
Ramirez, former Harris County DA prosecutor, just a jewel of a human being. We do make a difference. So, for those of you that have invested and contributed to Texas Latino Conservatives, keep it up. And if you want us to continue this mission of encouraging, training, and running Hispanic conservatives for office, make a contribution. We survive on the generosity of Texans to keep this organization going. You guys have been very generous so far, but please keep it up. Thank you.
Thank you so much y nos vemos el próximo miércoles. Chao, chao.